What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So the NHL trade deadline has come and gone, and I thought a nice way to wrap it up and put a little bow on it would be to grade all 32 teams based on how they did in the NHL trade deadline. I'm going to be going from the Mikko Rantanen trade about a month and a half up until yesterday, because the Mikko Rantanen deal was really what started to kick off trade season. A guy that was an expiring guy. Colorado decided to dump him. Then a week later, we had other kind of deadline moves, rental moves like Marcus Pettersson, Mikael Granlund, as well as JT Miller get traded. So Rantanen up until 3 p.m. or I guess 5 p.m. because some of the deals didn't trickle out until then. What these teams did in totality. And yeah, the grades are going to be based on, did teams address needs? Did teams smartly sell? What kind of value did they get in said deals? We're going to get into it. Let's not waste any time. And up first, we are starting with the Central Division with the Winnipeg Jets. And I'm going to go with the C-. I was really disappointed in what the Winnipeg Jets did. They were one of my biggest losers. 2 second-round picks and a fourth for Luke Schenn and Brandon Tanev. That is extremely underwhelming. I understand Winnipeg kind of went for it last year, but I expected them to do something serious yet again, considering they did have some holes when looking at that second-line center position. Maybe they missed out on Brock Nelson, as well as definitely could have added a more of an impact defenseman than Luke Schenn in the year 2025. Yes, he does have another year at $2.75 million, but I'm just not that high on Luke Schenn. Yes, these guys are physical playoff kind of guys, but they're not really high impact guys. It's a third pairing defenseman and a fourth liner, and you paid 2 second-round picks. Yes, it was a seller's market, but yeah, Winnipeg did not really address any of their issues. And Winnipeg's a market where you kind of got to be aggressive through trades, through the deadline in order to acquire talent, because you're probably not getting them via free agency. So yeah, very underwhelming for the Winnipeg Jets. On the exact flip side of that, the Dallas Stars get an A when looking at it. The fact that they traded for Mikko Rantanen, they did give up a lot to get Mikko Rantanen, but because he's not a rental, they signed him to an 8-year deal at $12 million, a deal that we can all agree that is probably a relatively team-friendly deal when looking at what this guy has done prior outside of his tenure with the Carolina Hurricanes. So they got that done. Yes, they traded 2 first-round picks, but it's Dallas. They're going to be a highly competitive team for the next 5 years. Those picks are going to be at the earliest like 24th overall. And Logan Stankoven could become a damn good first liner, but not for another 2 to 3, 3 to 4 years, most likely. So that was a very good deal. And then Mikael Granlund picked up a solid center, especially because Tyler Seguin might not be back for the playoffs, for a first-round pick. Cody Ceci, although I don't love him as a player, what they have right now on the right side, he is technically an upgrade on that third pair. So very good work by Dallas. They traded a lot, but when you have such a good young core like Dallas, you can kind of just throw away first-round picks to go for it. And the Rantanen trade isn't just some kind of rental. He's there for the long haul. I almost said the long hair. The St. Louis Blues, not applicable. They didn't really make any moves. They traded Scott Perunovich at the end of January for a 5th-round pick. Perunovich wasn't really on the team, wasn't really cracking the lineup that much. Cam Fowler deal, although it wasn't at the deadline, he's been playing great. Got to show love to him. 21 points in 34 games for the St. Louis Blues. You probably don't know that because the Blues are just largely irrelevant right now. But yeah, didn't do much at the deadline. Moving on, the Minnesota Wild. I'm going to go with a B when looking at it. Gustav Nyquist for a 2nd-round pick. I think he's definitely somewhere in between the player that he was last year, 75 points, and this year on pace for like 30 points this season. He's still a good middle sixer. Minnesota definitely needed some winger depth within their middle six. They also traded for Brazeau. I don't love that they traded Kutstanov. I probably botched that name. I don't love that, but I don't blame them going for a guy like Brazeau that can definitely help them on this year's run, as well as maybe re-sign him. They can't quite go for it until the Parise and Suter deals are up, and especially with their injuries. Although Kaprizov and Ek are expected to return, this isn't quite their year to really go for it. So as a result, I'm going to go with the B. Another non-applicable that we can't really grade, the Utah Hockey Club. They only traded away Shea Weber's contract, picked up a 5th-round pick to do that, as well as 2 younger guys. But, I mean, that's kind of a nothing burger deal. Moving on, the Blackhawks. I'm going to go with an A- for the Blackhawks. They first retained on Mikko Rantanen and traded Taylor Hall and got their own 3rd-round pick back. They got clowned for that at the time, but again, that was their own 3rd-round pick. That's basically a late second, so I thought that was pretty good work. The Seth Jones deal, retained $2.5 million, but got a 1st-round pick on top of Spencer Knight, who has been playing pretty good for them. I love that for the Chicago Blackhawks. The only reason why it's not an A is they didn't trade Ryan Donato. I thought they could have got a 1st and maybe even more based on the way that the market was going. I fear that they're going to re-sign Donato on some like 5-6 year deal, and it's going to become an overpayment relatively soon. I understand that you need to surround Bedard with some kind of talent. Brian Donato is not some kind of like elite talent that Bedard long term is going to be playing with. I think they should bring that in via trade, and potentially could have used the assets from a Donato trade to bring in some impact guy this summer. Still good. I didn't expect them to trade Seth Jones. They did. They got a solid haul. As a result, I'm going to go with an A- and probably closer to an A than say a B+. The Nashville Predators, I'm going to go with a C. This was a weird deadline for them. Gustav Nyquist's return was fine, a second-round pick at the time. They probably should have traded him like a month or two ago when his value was still higher, because he was coming off that 75-point season and Nashville was out of the playoffs by like a month and a half into the season. So from that perspective, I don't love the Nyquist when you look at how it developed, as well as the Schenn and Novak for Bunting in a fourth. I don't know what Trotz was thinking on that. Maybe he's going to flip Bunting next year for a decent haul, but immediately the Pittsburgh Penguins were able to flip Schenn for a second and a fourth. So they basically traded Bunting. They got Bunting for Novak in a second and a fourth. And I think Novak is as good as Michael Bunting, so I don't really know what was going on there. As a result, the Predators get a pretty shit grade, sticking in the Central. Colorado, A-. They gave up a shit ton in terms of value within the trades. I maybe don't love it, but now they're a legit contender. When looking at first, the Mikko Rantanen deal got clowned on a decent amount by Colorado. I definitely liked it a little bit more for Carolina because they were getting the better player, but I thought it was a solid return with Martin Necas, who's locked up another year at $6.5 million, and they picked up a second-round pick. That deal is aging very good for them. Martin Necas has been a point-per-game player immediately after joining Nathan MacKinnon, so that deal was fine for them. I objectively don't like the Ryan Lindgren deal still, giving up Parsonian, Dahan, a second and a fourth for Lindgren and VC. That's the one deal where, like, without a doubt, I don't really like it that much. They gave up a solid haul for Brock Nelson. In terms of value, again, I don't love that deal. Callum Ritchie in a first-round pick, but the second-line center was such a need and was going to hold them back if they didn't address it come playoff time, and they are so aggressively win now. Then they traded Charlie Coyle in a fifth-round pick for Casey Middlestat in a second-round pick, or they traded for Charlie Coyle in a fifth-round pick for Casey Middlestat in a second-round pick. Selling pretty low on Casey Middlestat, but I understand the logic that you're not going to be throwing Casey Middlestat in a third-line center defensive role. Charlie Coyle is definitely more fit for that. So yeah, they addressed needs. They maybe shortened their window a little bit just because they were so aggressive, but they went from probably losing to Dallas or Winnipeg in the first round if they face them, to now being a formidable threat that could beat anybody in the NHL and are within that probably top 5 contendership as well. And I think that if you also add on the Blackwood trade, it's definitely an A-. That obviously came before in like early December, but very good work by Colorado, even though they gave up a decent amount. Moving on to the Pacific Division, the Anaheim Ducks, once Vetrano got extended, they didn't really have a ton to sell. They ended up trading Brian Dumoulin for a second-round pick. It is Winnipeg's second-round pick, not New Jersey's, so it's probably going to be like 59th, 60th overall instead of like 50th or something like that, but still awesome. Brian Dumoulin getting a second-round pick. That's crazy. I don't love that they took on Ville Husso, but they needed goalie depth because they had so many injuries, both at the NHL and AHL level. And for John Gibson, there wasn't a ton of suitors, and Edmonton said that they were going to stick with their guys, so I understand them just being like, we're not going to force a deal. Let's wait until this summer, and then we can get a decent haul. We can get a first-round pick when teams can properly allocate to acquire a John Gibson instead of having to somehow fit his $6.4 million in. Seattle Kraken, they get an A+. They killed it this deadline when looking at, they finally realized that the current core, the current group of forwards is not good enough. They're mid as hell, below mid right now at least, and they traded Bjorkstrand and Gord for 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick, and they didn't even have to retain on Bjorkstrand, who makes $5.4 million the following season, on top of getting a 2027 second-round pick for Brandon Tanev, a guy that they had no business re-signing in the future. Now some of their young guys can hopefully play at the NHL level next year, and they have a serious war chest of assets, courtesy of the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Winnipeg Jets. The Golden Knights, I'm going to go with an A-. I think you can kind of count the Brandon Saad signing as like a deadline move. I know it's a free agency signing, but it's something that you got to compete with other teams for, and they ended up winning out in terms of signing him at a $1.5 million cap hit. That's awesome work, and they got Riley Smith for a third-round pick for the New York Rangers. Jesus. But yeah, Saad and Smith for a third-round pick. That's pretty solid work by the Vegas Golden Knights, who, after last deadline, they weren't going to go nuclear. They traded first-round picks up the wazoo for Noah Hannafin and Tomas Hertl. So this was always going to be more of a low-key deadline, and they got 2 very good middle six wingers at basically no cost. So very good work by Kelly McCrimmon. The Vancouver Canucks, C. I think that when you look at the Miller for Pedersen and Hedel total, I think that was about a wash. I think that was a fair deal given their leverage. But actually at the deadline week, with how just mid to bad they've been since that Miller trade, for them to not move off of Brock Nelson, with Brock Besser. Oh my God, I just ran through Brock Besser. To not trade Brock Besser after having no momentum on an extension right now, completely up in the air. You could have got a similar return to what Brock Nelson got from the Colorado Avalanche. Crazy, man. Bad asset management by the Vancouver Canucks. They didn't even trade like a Pia Suter that probably could have got them a second-round pick. And now they might let Brock Besser just walk for nothing, which would be an utter disaster, and rightfully so. They should be catching a lot of shit. The Calgary Flames, I'm going to go with the B- for their total month and a half. I didn't love the Farabee and Frost acquisition as much as others. I didn't hate it. I came around more to it after I gave it a pretty harsh grade. But Farabee only 2 points in 12 games thus far. Frost 5 and 12. I think they're going to be fine middle Sixers. But that deal was okay. Didn't love them giving up a second-round pick, though. My problem with Calgary and why they're more so of a B-, I think that isolated deal is more of a B+ at this point, is you saw how big of a seller's market it is, and Rasmus Andersson hasn't even been good for them this season for the past 3 months-ish. The fact that you didn't move off someone like him or Nazem Kadri, if you retained $1 to $2 million, you could have got a haul based on what we saw teams getting this year for experienced guys. So they should have moved off one of their long-term guys, especially in Nazem Kadri, where the final 2 to 3 years of that deal, you're going to regret not moving off him now, as well as Rasmus Andersson. I don't know what the fuck the plan is with him. Are they going to give him some kind of 8-year extension at $7.5 million to a 29-year-old? Yeah, Calgary should have been more aggressive in selling assets. I like the Frost and Farabee move because those guys are in their mid-20s, but some of their older guys, they probably should have moved off because it was such a seller's market. Another shit grade goes to the LA Kings. They get a C-. Didn't do jack shit. Their one move was acquiring Kuzmenko for a 3rd-round pick. Absolutely mind-blowing. Kopitar, Doughty, Kemper. All of those guys are old as shit. They do have some young guys in the roster and some like mid to late 20s guys, but trade some first-round picks. You have those young guys in their 20s. You have a guy like Liam Greentree. How are you not aggressive? And I know it's it's hypocritical to say that it's been such a seller's market, but the fact that they did nothing, and now I can't see them going on a deep run after what Colorado, Dallas, Edmonton did at this year's deadline. They're firmly in that second tier of the Western Conference, and they're going to probably be a first-round exit yet again, and Rob Blake, rightfully so, should get fired because he didn't do jack fucking dick. Sharks, B+. I'm going with the B+. I feel like people are going to be more bullish on this. They got 2 first-round picks for Jake Wallman and Granlund. That's about what I expected if they ended up getting traded. I didn't like the Zetterlund deal, though. That was very confusing for me. They pick up a second-round pick, but it's Ottawa's second-round pick. They trade their 4th-round pick to Ottawa, so they're only moving like 50 spots from like 48 to 98. Weird. Zetterlund's 25 years old, 40-ish point pace this year, good middle sixer, and you move off him for not that much. I just not a fan of that deal, and that kind of holds it back for San Jose. And I also kind of probably would have waited a year to trade Jake Wallman just because the defense score is so bad now at this point. Edmonton, speaking of Jake Wallman, I'm going to go with a B for the Edmonton Oilers. The Frederick deal looks better now that we saw how much other teams gave up for players of his quality. A 2nd and a 4th isn't the end of the world. As well as Jake Wallman, it's not a good or perfect fit by any means, a left-handed offensive defenseman, but having him this season and next at $3.4 million, I think is perfectly fine. Yeah, they didn't address the goaltending, but again, the only guy that they could have done to do that is John Gibson, who is a big risk at $6.4 million. So I think it's a fine deadline. Yeah, they nothing big like 2023 with Matthias Ekholm, but pretty effective. We're moving on to the Metro Division with my New York Islanders. I'm not wearing a New York Islanders hoodie. I'm wearing a Hornets hoodie, but they get an A-. The Brock Nelson return, A+ in my opinion. They didn't trade Kyle Palmieri, though. That stinks. If they traded Kyle Palmieri, they would have got a first-round pick, traded JGP or something like that. We could have had an A++, ended up with 2 first-round picks, Callum Ritchie and a second-round pick or something like that. Still can't be mad. Brock Nelson was the guy that was going to get the most value. They traded him. If they traded Palmieri instead of Brock Nelson and re-signed Brock Nelson on a 3 by 7.5 that it was apparently rumored that they were offered, that would have been a disaster. So they ended up in like the 60th percentile of what I thought their deadline could be, 65th percentile. They avoided disaster by keeping both. So I can't be too mad. I think an A- is fair. Their one deal was great, but it definitely leaves some to be desired on the table in terms of what Lou Lamoriello could have done. The Carolina Hurricanes, they get a B. It's underwhelming just because they took that big swing on Rantanen and ended up flipping him. But when you look at the total package of what came in and what came out totally. Natchez, Drury, and a second-round pick for Stankoven and 2 firsts. They're Dallas's first-round picks, which I don't value that much. I talked about it on the podcast. Those picks are about to be, again, 25th or later. But yeah, it's solid. Stankoven could eventually reach Martin Natchez level. I'd say there's like a 30% chance that possible. He's already a pretty effective middle sixer. But this season, with their forward core is very, very lackluster when looking at playoff teams. I know someone's going to comment, oh, you're an Islanders fan. You're talking about mediocre. Relative to playoff teams, relative to the top 10 teams, you can argue it's the worst top 9 among top 10 teams in the NHL, and I think you would be right. So this year, maybe the one year we don't have any expectations they go on some kind of deep run, but yeah, this year might be a wash. They prioritize the future a little bit more, and if Martin Natchez wasn't really keen on re-signing in Carolina, that definitely helps as well. Hopefully Stankoven lives up to his hype, because I really like Logan Stankoven. He hopped on the page for an interview one time. Go watch that. Yeah, the Rangers, next up, they get an A- as well. The Miller deal was not solely for this season. I don't love them giving up a first-round pick that could be like 14th overall this year, but this year's draft is kind of weak, and I think next year they probably should be a playoff team, so I can't hate that. Filip Chytil's a big injury risk. I love the Lindgren deal, getting a second and a 4th-round pick for Ryan Lindgren. The Smith out I liked, and I probably would have him at like an A right now if they just kept it that way, but trading him for Carson Soucy, who is a little bit up in the air, makes $3.25 million this season and next, and has been asked this season. Last year was pretty good, was a little bit confusing, but still, I do like Drury selling a decent amount. Once he made that Miller move, and again, Miller has multiple years, he's going to be well worth $8 million after these kind of years. Pretty solid for the New York Rangers. I'll give them an A-. For Washington Capitals, I'm going to go with the B+. They weren't ultra aggressive, and I respect that. When looking at teams like Winnipeg and LA, their time is now. Washington, we still don't know how legit this team is. I think they're a good team, don't get me wrong, but they have 103.58 PDO, which is your shooting percentage plus your save percentage. They have a 60.48 goals percentage versus 52.6% expected goals percentage, which ranks 10th. Again, still a good team, but I think that they knew that they're not in that top tier of contender. It would have cost a bunch of assets to potentially join that top tier like we saw some other teams do. So I respect them just saying, we're going to make a small move. Beauvillier, I don't like the Beauvillier deal. I think that's like a C+, giving up a second-round pick for him. But I like that they just said, we're going to sit back. We're not going to be a 2024 Vancouver Canucks, which were in a similar boat, out of nowhere smashed expectations, but it was kind of fugazi. I know they could have won that Game 7 if they had Demko and Besser, but they're going to sit back, not trade any assets. On top of the fact that their deadline acquisition is kind of Ryan Leonard coming up from the college level. He's going to be a very effective third liner for them. So yeah, don't risk the future. Don't trade a Tarek Parasak and Andrew Crystal or first round picks. Just see how it goes in the playoffs and reassess from there, make splashes from there, especially when you see these Atlantic teams go like nuclear all in the next two to 3 years in terms of they don't have any first round picks and now their cores are decently old. Let them implode trying to win the cup the next 2 to 3 years. I know you want to get Ovechkin one last, but your future is so bright in terms of your prospect pool and your guys in their 20s and low 20s right now. Just play it by ear. Next up, we got the Pittsburgh Penguins. I'm going to go with an A. They basically won every single deal that they were in. The Pettersson deal, again, going back to that, might end up being 14th overall for Marcus Pettersson that they got for the Vancouver Canucks, the Rangers pick. And then their smaller deals were awesome as well. Got a 5th-round pick from Desharnais, who they got in the Pettersson trade. They turned Bunting into Novak, a 2nd and a 4th. Got a 2nd-round pick for Anthony Beauvillier. Got a 3rd-round pick for Cody Glass. They took advantage of the seller's market. Again, not the sexiest pickups. They didn't get a single first-round, or they got the first-round pick for Pettersson, but actually deadline week they didn't get a first. You could go with an A+, and I wouldn't hate you, but it's a lot of minor, smaller moves of late. Definitely an A by Kyle Dubas. The Philadelphia Flyers, I shall go with an A-. I liked the Frost and Farabee moves, considering they're solid middle sixers in their mid-20s, but not real impact guys. Commit to stinking the rest of the way this year and maybe even next year as well, and pick up a decently high 2nd-round pick, like 45th to 50th most likely. They flipped Kuzmenko from that trade for a 3rd-round pick. They got a 1st-round pick for Lawton, as well as Grebenkin, I think will be beloved in Philadelphia in that bottom 6 as a physical demon. You maybe could have traded Risto, but I think that he still has 2.5 years left, so you can move him off this summer or move him at next year's deadline. I liked how they weaponized their cap space with Scott Lawton retaining $1.5 million. Solid work by Danny Briere and the Philadelphia Flyers. On the flip side of that, The New Jersey Devils, I am going with a C minus. They were in a tough spot in terms of the injuries. Jack Hughes gets announced out for the rest of the season on Tuesday. Also, we just found out the post-deadline press conference. Siegenthaler's out for the season. Hamilton's out for an extended period of time. And as a result, they overpaid to kind of fill some voids. And I still don't even think that they came remotely close. Obviously, not replacing Jack Hughes. But like in terms of getting real ads that can help them, they spent the second-round pick for Brian Dumoulin instead of like calling up one of their young guys within their system, which, by the way, I think after the Kovacevic extension, Simone Nemec is gone in no time, as well as Cody Glass for a third-round pick. They retained on that Frederick deal. They kind of had a Nepo pickup in terms of picking up because of retaining. I forget the guy's name, Shane something. It's the head scout's son, so I don't really like that look in terms of optics. Yeah, not that good from Fitzgerald. Was in a tough spot, but still overpaid pretty sizably. C minus for the New Jersey Devils. The Columbus Blue Jackets, they only did like one move. They got a B. I don't hate them not moving Provorov. They would have got a haul, but I respected them being in a playoff spot right now after everything that they've had to overcome this season to just go for it. And they traded a fourth-round pick to get Luke Kunin, get some help, say to the room that you believe in this core. We are now into our final division, the Atlantic Division, and we are starting with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm going to go with a B. They overpaid a little bit, but again, seller's market. For Lawton and Carlo, they gave up 2 first-round picks, Fraser, Midden, Grebenkin. They did get retention on Lawton and some retention on Carlo. But yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. And now they don't have their first round picks for the next 3 years. I think I might actually go down to a B minus. No, B, because they needed that third line center, and Brandon Carlo is a solid piece. B for the Leafs in terms of actual trade value. C plus probably, but they did get some big fits, and it's not just rentals for right now. B for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Also, the Tampa Bay Lightning, who traded a similar haul, 2 first-round picks and a second for Gord, who I think is better than Scott Lawton, as well as Bjorkstrand, good second-line right winger for this team. I'm going to go with the B+. Gave up a decent amount, but again, Bjorkstrand has another year at $5.4 million, which he's well worth, as well as Gord, I think, is probably going to re-sign on some kind of cheap deal to be on that third line, come back home after spending some years in Seattle, some rough years. He realized how good he had it in Tampa Bay. He cashed out. Sign something cheap, retire in Tampa Bay. Awesome place. The Ottawa Senators, A-. I like what the Senators did. Cousins might never turn it around. I think they'll turn it around to some degree. But yeah, even not, you get off. Even if he doesn't, you get off Josh Norris, who is so injury prone. There's such a big risk with that. And you pick up a Buffalo second-round pick on top of the Zetterlund deal. Zetterlund deal is objectively awesome, as I described with San Jose. Ottawa's only moving from like 48th to 98th, and they pick up an effective middle sixer that's an RFA that they can re-sign or flip his RFA rights for even more assets. Love that deal for the Ottawa Senators. The Buffalo Sabres, on the flip side of that, I'm going to go with the C+, not really because I hate the Norris deal, because again, when he's healthy, he's better than Dylan Cousins right now. I don't love them giving up that second-round pick. But it's also that they re-signed both Jordan Greenway and Jason Zucker. I thought that they should have traded at least one of them. They have so many young forwards coming up within the system and just young guys on the roster right now that need ice time that you re-sign both of them. Not massive. I believe both of them are 2-year extensions, not some insane long-term extensions. But yeah, weird. Zucker is killing it this year. You could have got a sizable haul. Instead, you re-sign him for 2 years. He's 34 years old when that kicks in. Might end up just falling off a cliff. So yeah, C+ for the Buffalo Sabres. For the Florida Panthers, you got to go with an A. The Seth Jones deal, in the moment, I was a little bit hesitant on it, but when we saw how much other people were getting, I think now it's like a B+ most likely deal. You move off Spencer Knight, which I'm a little bit concerned for their goaltenders of the future, but you get a legit, very good second pair guy that can play top pair minutes, obviously. On top of Marchand, great value. We now know the conditions on the Marchand trade. It's a conditional second that turns into a fifth. If Florida makes the Eastern Conference Finals and Marchand plays 50% of the game. So if that hits, you're in the Eastern Conference Finals. Awesome. If it doesn't, you're only giving up a second-round pick, a late second-round pick. So what? And yeah, it's not like you gave up a shit ton like years past, like a Claude Giroux at 2022's deadline when they give up a first, an Owen Tippett, and a third. So they've learned from their mistakes. Marchand kind of forced his way to Florida. But yeah, very solid deal for them. A for the Florida Panthers. For Montreal, they didn't do shit. They ended up re-signing Armia Evans. I guess I'll just give them like a B. Yeah, I understand not wanting like another second round pick or a third round pick for those guys and potentially go for it in terms of the playoffs this year. Red Wings also get a B. They didn't really do shit as well. They moved off Veleno, who at this point is just a bust. They got Mrazek, who can maybe bounce back next season for the team, as well as Craig Smith is a decent upgrade within their bottom six, upgrade over Veleno right now at least, as well as picking up a fourth, retaining on Gord. I don't think that this team is making the playoffs at this point. They've lost some games heading into the deadline. So I don't blame Yzerman for not being like, I'm fully going for it. I'm trading a shit ton to make the playoffs and then get pumped by the Florida Panthers in the first round or something like that. And then lastly, we got the Boston Bruins. I'm going with the B+. I know that might be crazy. In terms of PR, it's obviously an F-. Brad Marchand going to the Florida Panthers, but it's more so the other stuff that they got in this deal. I believe that they got a first-round pick, 2-3 second-round picks. One of them obviously can become a first-round pick. In Brad Marchand, picked up guys like Fraser Midden, like Murat K from Minnesota. I'm going to botch his name again. They picked up a lot of interesting assets, and they finally decided we need to retool. Rightfully so, because they're out of the playoffs right now. I know that this is a tough pill to swallow, but this retool can work for the Boston Bruins. It really can work, considering the fact that they have a superstar forward, they have a franchise defenseman and a great top pair guy in Hampus Lindholm, franchise defenseman in McAvoy and then Lindholm, as well as who I still think is a franchise goalie in Swayman. They needed to move off some of the current pieces that we're going to need sizable new contracts like Frederic. Well, Frederic wasn't going to ask for a shit ton, but like Brandon Carlo, next summer he was going to need something big. Marchand, apparently they offered him a 2x3, which is disrespectful, but I don't blame them for moving off him. And now this summer they can get really creative with it. They picked up Casey Middlestat, which I think is a really good buy low candidate, and only gave up Charlie Coyle and got a second round pick to take on Casey Middlestat. So yeah, I'm going with the B+. If the condition is met on Brad Marchand's pick, I'd bump this up to an A-. If it's not, I'd maybe bump it down to a B. But it's gutting as a fan to go through this. But for the long-term future, if they just stood pat, I get if they didn't make the Marchand deal, I'd probably have them at a B+ still, maybe even an A-. I don't love the Marchand deal. They maybe should have stopped there, but even if the Marchand deal turns into a first, I think you take that. And maybe you still sign him in the offseason. Maybe you make amends and re-sign him. But yeah, I'm going to go with the B+ for the Boston Bruins. They sold in a seller's market, and they got a lot of good deals. The only deal that they didn't get a good deal in is the deal where they accommodated their captain to where he wanted to go. That's the other thing I need to bring up. I said it in the moment. Elliot Friedman eventually said it on 32 Thoughts that Marchand wanted to go to Florida. Once he accepted getting traded by the Boston Bruins, he said, can you just do this for me? I'm your captain. And Sweeney, rightfully so, after all the years of loyalty, said, I'm going to work with you on a deal. He didn't host an open bidding for Brad Marchand. Obviously, Brad Marchand would get a return similarly to Brock Nelson, but in them trading their captain, he only has an 8-team no-trade clause, so he could have went anywhere. Don Sweeney did the right thing and looked out for Brad Marchand, and as a result, the return wasn't ideal. But I think overall the return is pretty solid for the Boston Bruins. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about these grades? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? It's been a wild week. It's been a wild month ever since that Rantanen deal. Thank you for following along with the page. I'll be seeing you in the next one. Peace.